When I served in Johnstown, I was in the walk area, and so this was right downtown. Johnstown is built around two main rivers that combine, and they at the sides of these rivers they have these concrete walls to help keep the water in, because in Johnstown's history it had two or three major floods that pretty much totally changed how it was. It used to be a booming town, but the floods wiped out many buildings and made it so that the cost of flood insurance was then expensive. And now it's more of a ghetto. There's a lot of broken buildings, a lot of empty buildings. There was a main bus stop, and that's how we got around a lot, got to the different parts of the town. There was a bridge called the Memorial Bridge in one of the floods. It had stopped much of the debris from destroying another part of town, and it's now got these lights along the top of the bridge, which they can change to any color of the rainbow, and they light it up and they change the different colors to different nights, and so it just lights up this bridge, and it's really pretty. And then they also have what's called the incline. It's like the steepest or something incline trolley. It goes up the side of this hill so that they can move people or cars from the flood zone rather quickly. Back in the day, it was known for working steel mills, but since that time those have closed down. I don't know of any major industry. I think that was one of the drawbacks in the town. There was a lot of people that didn't have jobs. As far as the ethnicity, we taught all over the board, but there seemed to be a lot of Caucasians and blacks. The one person that was baptized that I taught there was black. She was really awesome. One thing to note was in my area we were right downtown, and that's basically where the flood zone was. But if you moved out beyond that, up on the hills around it, it was a pretty nice area. Up the incline there was a really good neighborhood. But a lot of the places we went to were rather ghetto. There was a lot of government housing, and those are the more dangerous areas. I remember almost every night we were right on one of the major streets, and there was always sirens going past us. Another thing we'd often hear going through town was gunshots, but we didn't know where they were from. We were never close by at all. I remember in one of the more dangerous areas we served in, when I first got there, we were driving on the bus, and my companion was pointing to the bus stops and pointing out how they'd just replaced the glass in all of them because someone had gone and shot them up. But I never saw any problems. I think the only thing that I ever really got close to was with somebody that we started to teach, who ended up being in a shooting. It was like right after training. I was in Johnstown, I was getting a new companion, and we were on splits, me and another elder waiting for our companions. We were walking around trying to find people to teach, going through the people we'd talked to before. And we were walking down the street, and this Jeep pulls up on the side of the road next to us. This guy with this big afro leans out the window and he's like, "Hey, I want to talk to you guys." And for me, that didn't really happen very much. So we were like, "Yeah, we'd love to talk to you. Yeah, let's do that." But then this car pulls up behind him, and there wasn't a very wide street, so he needed to move on. So he drives away, and we're like, okay, we've got to find this guy. We're never going to teach him. And this was in a part of town that kind of dead-ended. There wasn't any through streets, so we knew he was somewhere up in that part. So we started chasing down this car, and I remember going so far, and we couldn't see the car anymore, and it made some turns, and we went to these intersections, and we said a prayer, "Help us find where this car is." And we felt like we should go one way and then the next. Then we got to an intersection where we didn't have any idea where we should go. We said a prayer, and we're waiting, and this craziest thing happened. This little black girl comes out of this house. She's like, they went that way. And she points down the street. And we don't know who this girl was. The only possibility that comes to my mind is perhaps she was in the Jeep too and was dropped off, but I don't know. She went back into the house and we went down the street. We got to the end of the street and we're like, okay, now what? We don't know where to go. And so we felt a little sheepish now, but we prayed again. And the same little girl comes out. This time she has shoes and a coat on, and she was going somewhere, I remember. But she went with us a little ways, directing us, telling us where the house was so that we could find it. And she left, and we kept going till we found this house. And there was the Jeep right in front of it. I remember going to the door where the Jeep was parked in front of it. It was a split house. And knocking, and nobody answered the door. And we're like, oh man, we went through that whole thing. Nobody answered the door. So then we're like, well, it's a split house. If we confirm this is where it is, then we can come back sometime. So we went over to the other door, we knocked, and this big, tall, black guy comes out, and he's got this poofy vest on. And he's just burly. He's not real big, but just strong. I remember talking to him, and it was like, hey, we just talked to the guy that drove this Jeep. He said he wanted to talk to us, but he drove off. We weren't able to find out where he lived. Did he live right here? And this guy started talking to us. He was like, yeah, that's my neighbor. That's really cool. What do you guys do? And we're like, oh, we're we're missionaries. We go around and we teach about Jesus Christ. And we started teaching about the restoration, and he invited us in. And we taught him the first lesson right there. He gave us his number so we could come back. And I remember talking to him later, and he told us how if we hadn't talked to him about his neighbor, if we hadn't come with that in mind, he never would have let us in. He wouldn't have talked to us. But because we were able to be there in that way, he opened the door. And it was just such a miracle as I thought about it later, how we were led to that house and how his neighbor didn't answer the door so that we were able to meet him. Because right after we left his house, we went and we knocked on the neighbor's door again. He answered. We set up a time with him. So that was on Tuesday. Sunday, or at least the next Sunday, I remember calling him up and talking to him on the phone. And this is where I really heard about, I guess, the worst part of town. Because I talked to him on the phone. He's like, have you heard about me? I was on the news just recently. I'm like, no, we just talked to you on Tuesday. What happened? He said, I was in a shooting. I was shot 5 times. And this was over in the worst part of town. I could hear he sounded a little bit sedated, but we had no idea what was going on. We asked if we could come over and visit, and he was all right with that. So he wasn't too far away. We walked up there, and we went and saw him, and he had bandages around his head and his neck and his arm and his leg. He'd been shot through the neck, and yet he survived. It was another miracle. And I remember him talking about that experience. And it was really hard for him because when he was shot, his nephew was there, and he was shot and killed. And that was really hard on him because his nephew was like a brother to him. Just relating this story, it's important to know that Johnstown wasn't always the safest place, but that whenever we walked through Oakhurst, no matter what time it was, I never felt scared. I always felt like the Spirit was there. There was never anything to worry about. But it was another miracle that we were able to meet Jonathan right then, because if we hadn't met him before this happened, we wouldn't have been there to help him through it. And since we were there, we were able to teach him about the gospel and about the plan of salvation. And to see him hit such a low, and then to have the gospel in his life to make such a difference, was an amazing thing, because it just, after having all of that happen, brought him so much joy. That was one of the greatest things to see, was how happy he was and how much he enjoyed having us there, how much of a difference it would make. I remember teaching him, and he'd just get so excited, and he'd want to walk with us just to talk to us more when we had to go home. And it was just such an amazing thing. He would share with all his friends and talk about different things he learned.